part of the problem with at least this particular post is a certain ignorance of history. And I don't mean ignorance in the way that someone's unintelligent, though probably some of these people on Twitter are. What I mean is quite literally not knowing the history of World War II. It's, in other words, people who know history didn't really have a problem with that post because they understand the context and they understand the truth. People who don't know history have a problem with that because they literally don't know what the text is referring to. Okay? So we're going to take a minute and I'm going to do what everybody else hasn't done because they've talked about what she was trying to say. Many people have said, hey, this actually happened in history. That's nice. I'm going to give you the details because it matters. One of the things that's so very frustrating about this whole situation with Gina Carano is people are making statements and conclusions about her post that are, for lack of a better term, ignorant of history. So I'm going to take a second for you to just kind of go over this because it's really important in terms of understanding the historic context and truth about what she was talking about. Okay, so here we are at a website. This is an official website for an encyclopedia of Nazi propaganda. And I'm going to take you through some things. So, as it states here, following the Nazi seizure of power in 1933, Hitler established a Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. And make no mistake, it was all about the propaganda. There was no enlightenment. Okay? And the aim was to ensure that the Nazi message was successfully communicated through art, music, theater, films, books, radio, educational materials, and the press. This is important, okay, because this has parallels to right here. So let's review. She basically put a post where she stated that before Nazi Germany really took power and was able to round up all the Jews, she made the statement that before that happened, the German government demonized the Jews in the eyes of their German neighbors to the point that their neighbors began to dislike the Jews. And so when the Nazis started rounding them up, they didn't really have a problem with it. And many of them actually helped. In other words, you get people to hate the group you don't like first. And then when someone comes for that group, the rest of the public aren't really all that concerned. And I want you to keep that idea in mind. So on this website, and there are other websites in here, I want to kind of go through some things. So here is a poster. And they would put posters like this throughout the towns, throughout the cities in Germany, depicting Jews in very, very bad ways. Here is another example. This was a film that they used. And look at this. I mean, this guy looks like a vampire. And this gets into the whole idea of, they had this thing called, not Blood Feud. Let me find it here. Blood libel. Okay. Blood libel. An accusation that Jewish people used the blood of Christians in religious rituals, especially in the preparation of Passover bread. So that is a myth that never happened. That was never a thing. But the German Nazi Party put that type of information out. Okay. So, example, in film. Films in particular played an important role in disseminating racial anti-Semitism. the superiority of the German military power, and the intrinsic evil of the enemies as defined by the Nazi ideology. Nazi films portrayed Jews as subhuman creatures infiltrating the Aryan society. Now, these are movies that people are going to see. Now, you got to remember, before all of this happened in Germany, German citizens and their Jewish counterparts, their kids played together, they broke bread together, they did business with each other. It was essentially like, in a certain way, society as we see it now between whites and blacks, Italians and Jews, Italians and Irish, just everyday things. And then this started happening. Then there was the newspapers. Newspapers in Germany, above all, Der Stürmer, I have no idea, but it's interesting that it translates into the attacker, printed cartoons that use anti-Semitic caricatures to depict Jews. After the Germans began World War II with the invasion of Poland in 1939, the Nazi regime employed propaganda to impress upon German civilians, and soldiers that the Jews were not only subhuman, but dangerous enemies of the German Reich. And here's an example of, outdoor display of the newspaper showing all kinds of anti-Semitic things. Okay, so what did this all happen to do? The Nazi regime used propaganda to effectively mobilize the German population to support its wars of conquest until the very end of the regime. Nazi propaganda was likewise essential to motivating those who implemented the mass murder of the European Jews and other victims of the Nazi regime. So, again, if you go back, and I'm going to bring up, because I took a screenshot of this picture, if I could just find it here. Okay, I'll find it later. No, let me just, I want to do this correctly here. So we're just going to go in here and open this up. Okay, so look at this again. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, meaning no one fought the soldiers, no one tried to keep the soldiers from rounding up their neighbors or the kids that their own kids used to play with. The government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. And then, of course, how is that any different from hating someone for their political views? That's what she said. This is exactly what this website is talking about. The propaganda of the Nazis. And let's look at this again. Okay? Where did I have it? In art. So, pamphlets that were thrown up on the sides of buildings, in stores, showing Jews in evil ways. Music. So music that talked about or romanticized the superiority of the German people as opposed to the Jews. Theater, plays depicting the Jewish community doing bad things to the innocent German kids and families. Books, radio, educational materials, and the press. In other words, every single part and parcel of a culture was used against the Jews. Now, I want you to be clear on this, because, again, people who are getting upset with what Gina said are doing so because they don't know history, or they're so blinded by their own leftist thinking, they don't want to discover the truth. Culture in any country is always propagated through art, music, theater, films, books, radio, in schools, and the press. You shape a country's culture through all of those areas. And the Nazi Germans used every single avenue available to them to demonize the Jews in their country, so that when it was time for the government to turn against those Jewish citizens in Germany, Germans, or anybody who was non-Jewish, for the most part, didn't care. Now, she says, how is that any different from what's happening or hating somebody for their political views? Think about this. Let's talk about films, because Gina Carano is an actress. She's in movies, she's in TV, and in films, what do they do to conservatives? Make fun of them, denigrate them. What do they do to people who wear MAGA hats? In the press, demonize them, say that they need to be re-educated. That was the talking point right after the election. Educational materials. Right now, in schools, there is a push for what they call anti-racism teaching, which is this idea, and this is how they fool you. Again, propaganda. Using words, using art, to convince you of something that's not really particularly true in reality. So when they say anti-racism, it makes you think they're fighting the idea of racism. Except when you start looking at the materials, they're actually promoting racism. But I can really go deep in on that, but that's going too far for this particular video. The point is, in educational materials right now, anybody that's conservative, the idea of conservatism is often portrayed by teachers and professors as racist, white supremacist, KKK, Confederate, even though the Confederacy was the Democratic side of the country. That's what's happening right now. In music, theater, in other words, all of the areas of culture, all of the means in which culture is shaped in America is, as we speak right now, being used to demonize conservatives in general, Trump voters especially. Now, would it be too far to say that's going to eventually lead to what happened in Germany? Of course that would be too far to say that. But one, that's not what Gina ever said. But number two, if something like that was to happen, what would happen first is exactly what we're seeing right now. It is important, beyond Gina Carano, for you to understand this history. They say in order to make sure you don't repeat history, you have to actually know it. This is how people demonize others. This is how you get a subset of the community, any community, to begin hating the other community. I mean, heck, if we want to, I'll throw liberals a bone. This was done to the Indians when we got here and decided we wanted the land. Obviously, this was done to African Americans. There were professors that taught that, blacks can't be smart enough. Their brains aren't big enough. Right? This is how that happens. Okay? So, the whole point is, you need to know this. What Gina Carano said, first and foremost, was accurate It was historically factual, and it's happening right now.